Hello and welcome. In this video, I wanted to take a look at 1,000 points history battle list, as we haven't taken a look at one of those yet. This list placed 4th place out of 18 players in a tournament known as All Hope Is Lost 2022, which was held in the UK on November 12th in 2022. And this list was played by a player named Huey Herbert. If this tournament sounds familiar to you, this is the same tournament as the list we covered from the previous week, which was the Thousand Suns' 3rd place finish, coming in just above the 4th place finish of this list. With that being said, let's take a look at what this list consists of. This list is composed of a single patrol detachment being of the Order of the Bloody Rose for its subfaction selection. And if you're interested in learning what the different orders do, I will leave the links to the videos covering the orders specifically in the description down below. However, for a quick recap of the universal benefits that all units with this order gain, the Order of the Bloody Rose is a very melee-focused order that gives 2 different bonuses, the first of which says, if a unit with this conviction was charged, or performed a heroic intervention, they gain +1 attack for that fight phase. In addition to that, if they did charge, or were charged, or performed a heroic intervention, they also gain 1 additional point of armor penetration on their melee attacks. This was made a little worse than it was within the 8th edition rules, but the Order of the Bloody Rose still gives you so much benefit that it's considered one of the stronger orders for the Sisters of Battle, and can really take your melee units to the next level, as the basic benefits of the order are incredibly powerful. Anyway, let's move on to look at the HQ choice for this patrol detachment. This patrol detachment includes a total of 2 different HQ choices, the first one being a Canoness. The Canoness is a very versatile character that can be outfitted in many different ways. In this situation, the Canoness has been made the Warlord of this army list, and has been armed with a Blessed Blade for an additional 10 points. This means that currently the Canoness gets 4 attacks at a weapon skill of 2, with a total strength of 5, 3 armor penetration, and 2 damage. However, don't forget the Order of the Bloody Rose does give those additional benefits, which can raise her attack and armor penetration by 1. However, she has also been given a trait and a relic to further increase her combat capabilities. In this case, the trait that this Canoness has been given is known as the Blazing Ire, and the Blazing Ire is a Bloody Rose specific trait that you can only access within that specific subfaction. This trait gives +1 attack and gives the Canoness the ability to advance and charge within the same turn. This makes her able to get into combat much more consistently, and that's a big deal because anything that lets a melee character get within combat is always a big bonus. Now, in addition to that, this Canoness has been given the relic known as Chaplet of Sacrifice. The Chaplet of Sacrifice has a few different benefits on its own, the first of being that the bearer can perform an Epic Deed stratagem for 0 command points, excluding that of Divine Intervention. This is a rather good ability, as command points have been definitely put at a premium within the Nephilim chapter approved in the 9th edition rules. As such, the ability to decrease command points is always nice to have, and does do a lot more work than it did prior when command points were more plentiful. In addition to that ability, the Chaplet also says that the bearer can reroll the hit roll each time they make an attack, meaning that the Canoness is going to be a lot more accurate, and with her 2+ weapon skill, she's going to be hitting a lot of those attacks. Finally, the Chaplet has one final benefit, which says that before dying, that the bearer of the Chaplet can shoot one last time or fight one last time before they're removed from the tabletop, depending on what the phases in which they were destroyed, and that means in this situation the Canoness gets at least one final attack off before being removed from the table, and considering if she charged, in addition with that Blazing Ire, she does have a total of 6 attacks with that 2+ weapon skill, and you can roll the hit roll, in addition to 4 armor penetration and 2 damage a hit on a strength profile of 5, thanks to that Blessed Blade. This really does show that the Canoness can be quite an aggressive character, and can be a rather powerful character in melee depending on how you equip her and what subfaction you take her within. You can inversely build her in a very defensive way, but that's just not the style of the Bloody Rose. Anyway, with that being said, we continue on to our second HQ choice for this patrol detachment. The second HQ choice in this situation is yet another very offensive character known as Celestine, and Celestine comes with 2 Gemini Superior for a total of 200 points. And while we won't get too much into detail about Celestine, we can just kind of cover her offensive capabilities, as she has 6 attacks at a 2+ weapon skill with a strength of 7, 4 armor penetration, and 2 damage per hit when attacking with her Ardent Blade. In addition to that, any unmodified rolls of 6 to hit cause 2 mortal wounds instead of their normal damage, meaning that on average, she's generally going to be generating at least 2 mortal wounds when making those attacks. And this blade still has the ability to shoot with a profile of D6 assault shots at a 12-inch range, auto-hitting like a flamer at a strength of 6, 2 armor penetration, and 1 damage. So all in all, Celestine is a very powerful melee character that can do some decent shooting with her flamer profile on that sword. Don't forget she also comes with 2 Gemini Superior that act as bodyguards for her and function sort of like Zephyrum do, as they're armed with power swords and have very similar profiles. So for those 200 points, you're definitely getting your money's worth, and I do think Celestine is a little bit of a better selection at smaller games such as 500 points or 1000 points than something like Morvenval, who's a little bit more expensive, though does have a lot of benefits on her own right. In any case, I wouldn't blame you for taking one or the other at 1000 points, and I do think that the Canoness really does complement Celestine in this situation, as the two of them present very incredible melee threats that are reasonably durable that your opponent has to deal with, and both of them definitely have to be respected on the tabletop just because of how much capability they have to create absolute havoc if they reach critical units within your opponent's forces. Now with that being said, let's move on to troop choices for this patrol detachment. As this is a patrol detachment, this player decided to go with rather minimalistic troop choices as opposed to going with troops that are a little more upgraded, as we've seen in different sister forces. The minimal troop choices are definitely something common, and probably are a little more common than the more upgraded ones within sisters lists. In this case, this patrol detachment includes a total of 2 different troop choices, each of them being a unit of 5 basic sisters, with no upgrades included within that unit. This is a rather low cost and standard allocation of troops within an army list, and having 2 units of troops does give you a little more ability to take objectives and position more successfully on the tabletop, allowing your basic sister units to take those objectives while your other units and your character units go off and destroy different units of your opponent's line, creating overwhelming aggression within the Bloody Rose. Anyway, let's not dwell too long on the troop choice and move on to elite choice. The elite choice is a rather interesting one for this list, and one that's a little bit different than we normally see. First of elite choices is a little more common, being a unit of 8 Repentia, accompanied by a non-force organization slot known as the Repentia Superior, who can be taken as a no-force org slot instead of an elite slot due to that unit of Repentia. The Repentia Superior used to see very little play as she wasn't particularly good with an 8th edition, but going into 9th edition she definitely saw a big enough power boost to justify that 40 point cost, and now does show up in many different lists as an alternative to a Rhino for that Repentia unit. So what does the Repentia Superior do? Well, her melee profile isn't the most amazing, but she does have 2 very specific abilities that benefit those sisters Repentia. The first of those being an ability called Driven Onward, which allows you to select a friendly Repentia unit within 3 inches, and that unit can advance and charge within the same turn. In addition to that, when that unit attempts to make a charge roll, you roll an additional d6 and discard one of the dice rolled. This means that not only is your Repentia unit a lot more mobile, but they have a lot higher success chance when making one of those charge rolls. And as I always say, a melee unit that fails its charge roll fails to land any of its attacks and is probably going to be shot off the board. This is especially true on a unit such as the Repentia, who are absolute blender units and function as a bit of a glass cannon, meaning that once they're targeted, they're going to be pretty much shot off the table, but if they reach an enemy unit, they'll usually wipe that unit off the tabletop before going down themselves, as they just have that much damage capability, and that's pretty much why you see them in a lot of 2000 point lists, but not necessarily in 500 point lists, where their selection of different targets to go into and absolutely massacre to regain their points value is a little more limited. In any case, the Repentia Superior has one other ability that's a little interesting, and that is the Overseer of Redemption. The Overseer of Redemption simply says that friendly Repentia units within 6 inches gain +1 to their wound roll. This isn't the most necessary, but it's a nice little perk to have, and once again, just kind of benefits that unit of Repentia. In any case, I do think the 9th edition has definitely made the Repentia Superior a lot more of an interesting unit, and one that definitely sees far more play than she did in the past, and finally justifies her slot within the box of minis that she comes within, which is extra nice as she's included in that box of Sister Repentia, and you don't have to spend $30 on a single model like you do with a lot of the additional characters that you would normally pick up. Anyway, moving on, we come to the second elite choice for this patrol detachment. The second elite choice is one that we haven't seen too often, although was pretty popular when they first came out, that being a unit of 9 Celestine Sacrosancts. The Sacrosancts are not particularly expensive, coming in at only 14 points each, meaning that this unit is a total of 126 points for those 9 models. The Sacrosancts are a rather durable unit, having a 2+ normal save and a 4+ invulnerable save, as well as having the bodyguard ability, allowing them to better protect some of your characters. The one thing to keep in mind though, is because of their shield, they don't get the benefits of Armor of Contempt, which is a little bit of a bummer, considering that does hurt their durability a bit, and that's always a little bit of a shame, and probably why they become a little less popular within the 9th edition as things progressed, as things like the Paragon Warsuits have definitely outshined them a little bit, thanks to the Paragon Warsuits gaining the benefits of Armor of Contempt, as well as seeing a decent enough points drop. In any case, they do have an interesting stratagem known as Inviolate Shield Wall, which for 1 command point allows you to select a unit of Sacrosancts, and in the fight phase give them the ability to give enemies -1 to a wound roll when making attacks against that unit. That's definitely a good enough bonus against a lot of different targets, as it can really make it difficult for your opponent to take out the Sacrosancts once they're within melee combat. It's also not a particularly expensive stratagem at 1 command point, though once again command points are a little bit more of a premium, so it's a little bit harder to always have that active when you wanted to, and do remember it's not functional within the shooting phase, so that's definitely a big hit against it as well, as they're a little more fragile to shooting than they otherwise would be, especially without that armor of contempt. In any case, this unit of Sacrosancts has been armed with their Anointed Halberds. The Anointed Halberds give each of the Sacrosancts 2 attacks at a weapon skill of 3, 6 strength, and 3 armor penetration, as well as 1 damage. Not only that, but the halberds do definitely look really cool, but I also think the maces are nice as well. However, in most cases, you're probably going to be using those halberds instead of the maces, simply because they're a little bit better in their profile. And don't forget, you still have the bonuses of these being within the Order of the Bloody Rose. The Superior, however, is not allowed to have a halberd, so she is armed with a Hallowed Mace, which does not increase her points cost, unlike the Spear. The Hallowed Mace gives her 3 attacks at a strength of 5, 1 armor penetration, and 2 damage. As you can see, this is a decent time to compare the 2 stat line of the 2 different weapons, and while the damage characteristic of the mace is a bit higher, the problem is the armor penetration is very important, and the halberds have a big enough armor penetration difference that there really is a hard time justifying taking the mace over the halberd. Not only that, but going up to 6 strength is rather good, as all of a sudden you have a much easier time wounding toughness 5 units, which are becoming a lot more common, and you also have benefits against toughness 3 units, whereas strength 5 really doesn't kind of reach that same breakpoint, and only kind of gives you the benefit against toughness 4 units. In any case, we should also mention one other important stratagem that they have that's unique to the Sacrosancts, that being that they can use the Exceptional Proficiency stratagem for 1 command point, giving them +1 to hit in the fight phase, and while this stratagem is actually usable within the shooting phase, I doubt you're going to use it too often, as all they have for a ranged weapon is a bolt pistol, which seems like a bit of a waste unless you're in a very fringe situation where you do have to use it for that specific reason. I do think the Sacrosancts are a rather powerful melee unit, however they do kind of compete with the Paragons and the Repentia, making them a little less common within army lists. That being said, I do think they have potential uses within different army lists, and if you think they're just kind of a cool model like I do, there's definitely ways of running them even at 2,000 points and being rather successful. With that being said, that does conclude our coverage of the lead choice for this patrol detachment, and we can move on to the fast attack choice. The fast attack choice is composed of 2 different choices, the first of which being a unit of 5 Seraphims. The Seraphims are once again a model type we don't really see very commonly, though they aren't that bad, and this unit of 5 comes in at 80 points, as each model is 12 points, and 2 of the models have had their bolt pistols removed and replaced with Ministorum hand flamers. This means in total, you have 4 Ministorum hand flamers with a 12-inch range, d6 shots, 4 strength, 0 armor penetration, and 1 damage, but they do auto-hit being a flamer, so that's something nice. So this means on average, each flamer is going to get 3.5 hits, and with 4 hand flamers total, you're going to get a total of 14 shots that automatically hit on average. That being said though, if you do want to make more hits, there is a stratagem called Cleanse by Fire, which for 2 command points gives you the maximum shots those hand flamers can make, meaning that each of them will get 6 shots, giving you a total of 24 hits. That can be useful in certain situations, although it's a rather expensive stratagem coming in at 2 command points for the stat profile that these flamers do have. However, if you want to clean out a low armor swarm, that could be a good enough justification to add those 10 additional shots to assure those 24 shots instead of trying to roll off and get a bit lucky. That being said, the Seraphim are still pretty decent, and they do have the Deadly Descent stratagem, which allows them to deep strike onto a table and instantly shoot their flamers. The Deadly Descent did see a little bit of a nerf, which is why we don't really see the Infernal Pistols anymore, as it doesn't get that additional range bonus to their pistol weapons, but the hand flamers are decent enough, and considering that the unit costs a total of 80 points, it's not that bad considering in situations where you really want those flamer shots, you definitely get a ton of them and you can definitely do some work, while in other situations you can drop them down and essentially capture an objective, then use their high mobility to assist other units in other places on the table, or simply keep them in position to continue gaining mission points for whatever you want to accomplish in that situation. In either case, the Seraphims are definitely a versatile unit, and one that isn't necessarily so much bad, as it just has a lot of competition, like most assisted battle units do, which is why you don't really see some of these units as commonly as you would in other armies, just because you have so many different options that you can bring within the assisted battle forces that you have a hard time fitting all of them in within a single army list. Anyway, moving on, we come to a second fast attack choice, which is a unit of 6 Sephrim. The Zephyrim are one of those units that definitely edges out the Seraphim a little bit within the fast attack choice in most situations, simply because that for a unit of 6 of them, it comes in at 90 points, and they do have a rather good melee profile with their power sword weapons, so they can definitely do a lot of damage, and they're a little more in line with what the Bloody Rose wants to do due to them being a primarily melee focused unit. And do keep in mind that the points difference between the Seraphim and the Zephyrim is a total of 3 points per model, seeing as the Seraphim are 12 points and the Zephyrim are 15 points, but then you also have to take into account that you're going to be upgrading the bolt pistols on the Seraphims to something like the hand flamers, meaning that if you took a unit of 6 Seraphim, you would actually be a little more expensive coming in at 92 points than the unit of 6 Zephyrim, which is a little bit of a balance issue, and probably means that the Seraphim need a little bit of a boost or a little bit of a tweak here and there just to make them a little more interesting and competitive, though I do think they're a perfectly playable unit as they are now, and the Zephyrim are also very playable and very good, so you have that choice between which one you want to play, though in most situations I think you're going to go with the Zephyrim simply because they're just a little bit better and a little bit more successful in what they do, while having a lot of the same characteristics and abilities that the Zephyrim have, because they do build out of the same kit and they both kind of function within a similar role. In any case, I think both of them are good, and both of them have situational uses, and you can kind of mix and match depending on how you want to build your list, so it's really up to you. Anyway, with that being said, we conclude the fast attack choices, and we move on to heavy support choices for this list. The heavy support choices consist of all of one unit, being a unit of 6 Retributors accompanied by an Armorium Cherub. The Retributors are once again a very popular unit and a rather inexpensive one at 12 points a Retributor, however they do go up in price rather quickly once you start adding on different abilities, considering that Cherub is 10 points in itself, and this unit has been given 4 heavy weapons from the heavy weapon selection slot. However, unlike most Retributor units that usually are armed with 4 multi-meltas, this unit has a bit more of a mix, which is 2 multi-meltas and 2 Ministorum heavy flamers, meaning that in total this unit comes out to 142 points, as it's 12 points per bottle for 6 models, and then 20 points per multi-melta, 10 points per heavy flamer, and then 10 points for that Armorium Cherub. In any case, not a bad assortment, but I do kind of wonder why they mix and match the weapons, and I wonder if it's a points issue or if it's a situation where when you buy a box of Retributors, they don't actually have 4 of each heavy weapon, instead they come with 2 of each, so maybe they just didn't have the models and ended up having to kind of make that split. But at the same time, looking at the unit selections this player has, considering kind of the odd squad sizes on some of the different units, I'm assuming they have a lot of models they're not running, so they could have probably included other selections, or had different mixes of models, and maybe they even had the multi-meltas available, and they just chose to go with the heavy flamers because they realized they didn't need that quantity of multi-meltas at this points level, and figured that the heavy flamers were cheap enough that they were a fine enough inclusion to give those Retributors a little more protection and a little more output against swarm units, which they were potentially expecting to see more of than they were expecting to see armored targets. In any case, we may never know, but it is something interesting to think about, as it's not always as simple as model limitations, and there are going to be situations where players will go with non-standard choices on units such as this, simply to give themselves some advantage that we might not be seeing without knowing their full local metagame, or what they're potentially expecting to see depending on how they think about the game at the time. In any case, that concludes the coverage of this list, and I do think it's a very interesting one that contains a very nice mix of models, while having some very impressive characters, as well as having a very healthy amount of different unit types, and I do think once again it kind of shows the power of the Sisters of Battle, who have quite a big selection of different units at a low enough cost that they can bring quite an overwhelming amount of models to the tabletop and kind of use it to their advantage, as well as them having the ability to build in many different styles, as this list is a very melee offensive focused list with a little bit of fire support, while other lists we've seen have taken very different approaches, whether that's more of a durability list, a shooting list, or even a monster list as we saw in a previous 2000 point build. Let me know what you think of this list in the comments down below, and I'd like to say happy Thanksgiving to those viewers who do celebrate Thanksgiving, and don't forget, if you haven't already done so, please do like and subscribe to this channel, as it does help it out within the algorithm. And as always, thank you for watching, have a great day, anyway, see you next time.